Thanks for joining us today on Mormon Land, where we explore news in and about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm managing editor Dave Noyce. I oversee the Salt Lake Tribune's faith coverage. I'm joined again by senior religion reporter Peggy Fletcher-Stack. Hi, Peggy.
Hi, Dave.
We remind our listeners about another way to support Mormon Land. Just go to patreon.com, where with a small donation, you can access all the Tribune's faith coverage, ad-free podcast episodes, and the full Mormon Land newsletter. Again, that's Patreon, patreon.com/Mormonland. And if you haven't already, follow us on Instagram at mormon.land. And now for today's show. Brigham Young University star football recruits Ryder, Lyons and Brock Harris are stepping away from the gridiron and stepping up to serve missions for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Nothing new there. After all, about half the players on Coach Kalani Sitake's roster at the church-owned school are former missionaries. But wait, Lyons and Harris say they are going on one-year missions. Is this some new exception for elite athletes? Turns out, no. Of course, Latter-day Saints can and do leave their missions whenever they want, but the church maintains that full-time proselytizing missionaries are, quote, expected to serve their full term of service. That's 2 years for young men and 18 months for young women. Still, Harris and Lyons are announcing in advance their intention to fulfill half that stint. Is this good for the players? Is it good for BYU? Is it good for the church? Joining us in studio to discuss those questions and more are Tribune sports writer Kevin Reynolds, covers the Cougars, and columnist Gordon Monson, both of whom wrote about the issues recently in the Tribune. Kevin, Gordon, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to be here.
Okay, Kevin, set the stage. Tell us what Lyons and Harris have said about their decision, and have they said why they're making this decision?
Ryder Lyons is one of the best recruits. He's the best quarterback recruit that BYU's had in a very long time, in decades. And he announced that when he committed to BYU, that at the same time he was going to go on a mission, but he was going to go just for 1 year and return in 2027. And then Brock Harris, who we spoke to and spoke in depth about this with him and his family, announced the same timeline that he was going to come in, and he was also a very highly rated recruit. But this trend, I don't think, started with these two players, even though they are the most visible at BYU. I think this started a couple of years ago with Walker Lyons, who was a very highly rated LDS recruit. He was going to commit to USC, but he was also recruited by BYU and others. And he was one of the first to really decide and announce beforehand, not only that he was going to go on a mission, but that he was going to go to Norway, and he was intended to come back in 12 months. He ended up staying 16, but he wanted to come back and play immediately at USC because this is not a new trend. Like you said, people can come back from missions whenever they want, but it's also in college athletics, a very new era where players can make more money than they've ever made, and it is more lucrative to play at BYU and other schools than it's ever been. And so coming back and playing immediately, the calculus has changed.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that some more. So have Ryder and Brock said why they're doing this?
Ryder hasn't talked much about it, but okay. Brock we have talked about, and he mentioned that this was his calculus between he thinks that the amount of money he can make at BYU. We reported that he signed a multi-year contract to play at BYU worth over $1 million. Ryder, we could throw that in there too. He's going to make millions of dollars playing at BYU as well, and that's not even considering the NFL money that they're going to make. And he said that he had this decision of this amount of money can set up my family for a very, very long time. And it could be life-changing for my family to make this amount of money. But at the same time, he also wanted to have the missionary experience because by all accounts, I mean, he himself said he's a very faithful guy, and he wanted to find a way to split the difference. And for a long time, he said that he didn't think serving a mission was going to be possible for him because of the 2-year commitment. And he thought that was going to be too long, and he was going to come back and not be able to play football effectively, potentially sacrificing money at the NFL level or at BYU. And he said that when this was put on his radar to serve maybe 1 year, that's when he decided that this was going to be what he wanted to do to get the best of both worlds. And we can talk, and Gordon's talked about it in his column, but we can talk about some of the criticisms that he's faced. Mm-hmm. And he got into a lot of that too, and responding to those, but that was his overarching plan.
One of the things he told Kevin was it's better to serve 1 year than not at all. Mm-hmm. Hard to argue that point, I think. So
yeah.
So, Kevin, what was the church's response to this decision announcement?
The church has come out, at least publicly, and said that the standard time is still 2 years, and they have not wavered off of that. And BYU has kind of not said much about this at all. I think they'll say more a little bit when they actually sign at BYU in the next few months. But yeah, the church hasn't said a ton publicly. But one of the interesting parts, at least when you talk about the church saying it's 24 months and there's no exceptions for BYU football players or a very high level athlete. Brock Harris talked about this and said, kind of in response to that, of saying, well, yes, the sacrifice is 2 years, and part of the mission experience is because it is so long and because you have to sacrifice something that's part of what makes the mission such an important part of people's lives and such an important part of their religious experience. But at the same time, he said, 2 years for me isn't necessarily the same as 2 years for an 18-year-old who doesn't have the amount of earning potential right out of high school that he does. You know, he said sacrifice looks different for everybody, and sacrifice for 1 year for him, at least financially, might be very different from sacrifice 2 years for an 18-year-old who's just going to go to college or a job afterwards.
Okay, so let's get into what you have already raised, both you, Kevin and Gordon. How has NIL, name, image, and likeness, money, just changed the equation for top athletes in general, but certainly Latter-day Saint athletes, especially when it comes to deciding on missions, Gordon?
Yeah, it's huge for everything that Kevin just said. These guys can make a lot of money, and BYU's willing to pay it out to them. And, other schools will as well. But it does take the form a little bit of, at BYU, come here and we'll take care of you. And you don't have to go for the full 2 years. And that's been done before. I wrote about a kid named Enoch Watson who had made an agreement with his church leaders before he went. He served for 17 months, and he just got back in October. So, but the church has to, in my opinion, the church has to come out with a solid policy. Otherwise, I think they feel as though it will create chaos where everyone will start dictating how long they want to go, and they don't want to deal with it.
And I going off of that, I think I was talking to Brock Harris and his family, and I think there's like a twofold to this problem right here. For him and his decision, he feels like this is a very personal decision, and this is what he's going to make, and this is how his expression of faith is. But at the same time, from like the broader picture, like undeniably, it looks like a 18-year-old, 19-year-old who is a football prodigy. I mean, this is a guy who was offered from Nick Saban as a sophomore and is just dictating his own rules to the church. And I don't think that's necessarily how he views the situation, or is all the time fair to an 18-year-old to say, this is the position you're put in to express your own faith. But at the same time, and talking to people around the church, talking to people around BYU, that is the inevitability of when you're a BYU football athlete and a really high profile person. Your decisions are no longer viewed as only your decisions. You are a face of not just a BYU, but you're the face of a faith and a missionary program, which I think puts an 18-year-old in a really, really difficult position.
And there are other folks who have things to get back to as well. I mean, you could be a concert pianist, or you could be a great engineering student. Those guys and women can make a lot of money too, the sooner they hit the workforce. And so the church is in a tough spot because, I talked to some folks over there, and I don't want to speak for them, but I'll say it the way I interpret it. They don't want to set a precedent. They don't want to say, hey, this works for everybody. But as you said, Dave, it's always been up to the individual how long they're going to stay. And the problem is that sometimes there's a stigma attached when people come home early or are perceived to come home early. And because of this position that the church takes, it continues to perpetuate that, because they're saying, no. The official thing is you go for 2 years if you're a guy, and you go for 18 months if you're a gal. And that's it. And so that's what these kids are taught from the time they're young. And so when they go and they alter that, then, I think the church is trying to tamp that down a little bit, but it still exists.
I guess that's one of the reasons to announce early, look, this is what I'm going to do, so that stigma, people already know. Obviously, they want their coaches to understand that too. But
it's still attached. Even Brock Harris, Brock Harris talked about this. He said he's still facing pushback and blowback from people who know him, or not just people who he doesn't know who are members of the church, but people he knows every single day. And he goes to church with them on Sundays, and they're still telling him, hey, you're not doing this the right way. You're not going for 2 years. And Brock Harris's dad told him he understood this a little bit, I think maybe better, just because he's been around it longer. And he told Brock, he said, hey, if you go down this path, you're going to face a lot of pushback from people. And he said, it's wrong to judge an 18-year-old. You shouldn't do that. You're not in Brock Harris's position. But he also does know, like, the inevitability here is that he is going to face pushback.
Didn't he call them Puritans?
Yeah, he did. He did have a good quote that said that the Puritans in the church should stop, talking about an 18-year-old.
It's tricky, though, because I get it. I mean, I went on a mission. I know what that's like. I did the full 2 years, and I tried to get more people in than I chased away. I don't know if I was successful in that regard. But there are mornings you get up where you just go, man, I don't want to, I don't feel like doing this today. So if someone gets in sort of a skid, and they feel like, oh man, is this really for me? There are a number of people who do that, but I think the church is trying to protect against that. They're trying to play both sides of this. It's good for who it's for, but are you one of those?
So what does their coach think about this?
Kalani Sitake hasn't said much about this other than just boilerplate that he supports his players going on missions and those who do not go on missions, and that it's their own voluntary choice, which has been the I feel like the standard response from BYU for as long as I've been here, for sure. And but I do think it sets up the inevitable problem that they're going to have to say something more beyond that, because BYU is now in the Big 12. They're paying so much money to players. Brock Harris and Ryder Lyons used to be the anomaly at BYU, where these guys only come around once in a generation. And that's because they are so highly recruited. But that's increasingly not going to be the case at BYU. You look at basketball, you look at football, the level of athlete and even the level of LDS athlete coming in, these are decisions that they're going to have to make consistently. And now that it's been put out there that this is something you can do, I do think, I don't think this is going to be a one-off necessarily. I don't know if it's going to be a common thing where everybody does. I'm not saying that, but the fact that this is going to be just going away after Brock Harris and Ryder Lyons come in 2027, I don't think is realistic. So they're going to have to, I think at some point, they're going to have to say what their position is and how they work with players, even if it is their own decision and it's really not an athletics choice. Kalani Sitake has paid a lot of money to be one of the biggest spokespeople at BYU, and vice versa, because of that, the church as well.
And from a football perspective, solely, they need to know when guys. I mean, right now, if Ryder Lyons comes back early, now they still have Bear Bachmeier there, and how is that going to work out? He'll still have 2 years of eligibility.
Yeah.
If Ryder comes back in 2000. When is it? 27.
And this is a huge part of the recruiting pitch too. Like when, I mean, it's hard to say that it's completely a separation of BYU athletics versus the mission. What the decision on the mission is because when they're making this recruiting pitch and they have money in their contracts, like this decision wouldn't have probably been made or been such a decision if BYU wasn't paying millions of dollars to these players. So that's obviously a part of it. You're involved in it. But the second part is, it's like Kalani Sitake is building a recruiting class out of this, and he pitched Brock Harris and he pitched Ryder Lyons on the fact that they can come in 2027 and compete immediately for a college football playoff spot. And these are things that he's thinking about, but that has to do with when they're actually going to get on campus, which is a mission decision partly too.
I know that Kalani would give the party line, but I hope I'm not violating his trust, but I've had conversations with him privately. And he always, every time I've ever talked to him about church and about players and about service, he sides on the side of the individual, as opposed to the organization. So I hope, Kalani, I didn't betray you in that way, but I think he wants whatever the kid thinks is best for him.
What about the lay leaders, the local people? Those are leaders that have to sign off on this too.
Mm-hmm. And in the case of Enoch Watson, his stake president signed off on it. His mission president signed off on it, the 17 months. And he said other church authorities may have signed off on it too. But and not just may have, did. And he said he had a fantastic experience on his mission. And whatever this means, and Dave, is this still a term? I don't know, Peggy, is this still a term to serve, get an honorable release from a mission? If you leave early, do you get an honorable release? He did after 17 months.
I think that was in your story, right? That
it was in mine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, Brock Harris even talked about, like, at least from the mechanics of the mission, he thinks that nothing is different from what he expects to do. He said he's going to get and he just got called to go serve in Spokane, and Ryder Lyons is going to Orlando. And from everybody we've talked to, me and Gordon at the church, is that they got the same letter as everybody else, that the expectation is still 24 months. It's not like it's on the letter that says you're only going for 12 or you're only going for, 16 months. So, I mean, it's just that they're leaving early, and that's what they said.
Here's a question, and maybe you guys have the answer. You're asking us questions.
We're going to keep it that way.
What should the church do? I mean, should they open this up to individual people to decide for themselves, or should it be a sort of enlistment where, look, okay, you're committing to this, so we're expecting you to do it? I mean, everybody has a different circumstance, right?
Well, we don't have.
We
don't have opinions, but I'm sure that the church is pretty strongly believes that it would be chaos to allow individuals, as you said earlier, to allow individuals to just say in advance how long they're going to serve for. But at the same time, the church does acknowledge that people have different circumstances. I know a guy in Switzerland who committed for 2 years, but left after 1 year because he had a military obligation that he couldn't get out of. So I think they knew going in that he probably would only serve 1 year, but I mean, he's not any kind of athlete.
There are other exceptions too. Well,
that's what I'm saying.
Health, things like that, but not football at BYU. I've never heard that before.
Okay, so Gordon, what is I'm not a sports fan. And also,
shame on you.
Not very knowledgeable about this stuff. So I'm going to ask you a question that regular people might ask, which is, what's the physical cost to an athlete? And Kevin, you can answer this too. What is the physical cost to an athlete of taking off that much time from training? These kids are at the peak of their, maybe not the peak, but getting close to it. What is the physical cost of taking that amount of time
Well, you
away?
certainly, Peggy, aren't the only one who has asked that question or has made assumptions about it. Because, Kevin, how many times have we heard coaches say, BYU, they have mature players who have an advantage of an extra 2 years plugged into their eligibility, and so that's an advantage. Peggy, I have asked that question to well over 100 return missionary athletes. And every single one of them said it's a disadvantage, not an advantage, for the very reason that you just bring up. Staying away. These guys aren't going to, they're not going to L.A. and heading down to Gold's Gym every week or every day to train, to work out. Missions are brutally difficult. Let's say it the way it is. They're tough physically. They're tough mentally. They're tough spiritually. It's a difficult thing to do. And it is a great sacrifice, but these guys aren't out pumping iron, getting ready for their football careers while they're out there. At least most of them. There might be an exception here or there, but most of them are out getting up at 6 a.m. and studying and then going out and helping people or spreading the word or doing all that, and then coming home and going to bed at 10 o'clock at night. And that's it.
I mean, Kalani Sitake has basically said that unless you're an extremely rare exception to this rule, he's basically going to redshirt you or gray shirt you for that first year coming back if you serve a full 2 years, because you're going to get hurt. Like, not only are you not ready to go, you could tear an ACL. We've seen how many guys get injured coming off of that because, I mean, especially in football, if you're getting hit that hard and you're going, I mean, it's an incredible toll to take on your body if you're not ready for it, and you could get seriously injured. And so not only are you losing 2 years, you're losing the calculus is pretty much you're losing 3 or 3.5 years to get back to where you were physically. I mean, there's guys who went on missions who were really highly recruited and got back last year and are still not playing like right now for BYU just because they're physically not ready to go.
They're out of shape for elite level competition. They may do physical exercises, which is part of the missionary regimen, but it's not the kind of training that elite athletes do.
It's not football exercise.
Right. Or basketball or tennis, or you could go down the whole list.
Yeah, but especially football, because these guys are out banging around, hitting each other, and it takes time to get used to that again. But that's not to say a lot of these missionaries, they want to play as soon as they get back. They're eager to get back to it, but like Kevin said, they oftentimes can't.
Mormon Land will be right back.
How is a one-year mission thing good for BYU and school and its sports programs? Kevin?
Well, from a football perspective, it's undeniably better for Brock Harris and Ryder Lyons to be able to play right away. And then you go through the list of not just them, but anybody who's a really highly recruited player coming in right away is better because it impacts your program faster. And also it just helps out with timelines on, you don't have to wait 2 years and then maybe 3 years or 4 years. And like when you're looking at BYU, particularly recently with how well they played with 10 wins and last year 11 wins or whatever it was and contending for college football playoffs, like you want the momentum of your program to continue in terms of recruiting and the amount of money being poured into this program. And so all of that it's just better for Kalani and the staff to have a player or two players like that play sooner rather than later and theoretically impact your program sooner rather than later. Because I feel like particularly now, college football and college athletics is all about these like short windows of time where you really have to capitalize because you're paying so much money to this program. Like if Brock Harris and Ryder Lyons aren't theoretically ready to play for 4 years from now you've just poured in and sunk in millions of dollars into these two players and you're not getting any return back because they're not ready to play and they're not ready to contribute. And so much of BYU and like when you look at NIL, like you can't just assume at a place like BYU that you're going to spend $20 million on a roster every year. So they're budgeting this out and saying, this is exactly when Ryder Lyons and Brock Harris will be at their best for us, which won't be in 3 years. It will now be in like 2 years. And so we can invest all this money in the transfer portal and you go through and like we can bring in players around them to really compete. But if they're not ready to go, then you just waste a whole bunch of money. And now the entire window is missed.
And there's two sides to the mental part of doing this, not just the physical. Mm-hmm. The mental. I've talked to athletes who were fairly highly recruited who came back from their mission and didn't want to play anymore. You know, They were just a different mindset. And then there are those. I talked to a BYU basketball player once who served in Philadelphia. And he said, after you knock on doors in South Philly for 2 years, you're not afraid of anything anymore. So maybe that's considered an advantage in some of the athletes.
Is there any way in which this is bad for the school?
Well, I think it puts them in a really difficult position from a public relations. And like, I mean, BYU is undeniably everything's tied to the church there. So like every one of these problems that they have, at least from like how to explain this or like, what does this mean for the missionary program is undeniably a problem for Kalani Sitake and his staff and everybody else and the athletic directors. Like, so like from a football perspective, like obviously it's better, I think, to get them on the field, but the fact that they're getting on the field so quickly also creates a whole other issue, particularly from the outside and like how they're seen, not even just within BYU's like own ecosystem, but outside, like the perception of like you're writing your own rules or you're doing this. Like BYU's already had a lot of that perception going on already with how much money they're putting into the athletic programming. We've been on this show and talked about it a lot about like what is the perception of BYU paying players so much money to come play, like, and this is just another one of those kind of, I don't know if it's the exact same issue, but it is.
It's like, does it jive with its religious mission? Does it fit?
The same thing of like, what is the reality of what BYU is doing versus what is the mission of what BYU says it is, like Clark Gilbert's vision and things.
Some folks think that, that everybody should sacrifice to the nth degree, and it should be a calling, the football too, as opposed to the NIL situation where guys can get rich quick.
So we've kind of talked a little bit about this, Gordon, but outline to me the pros and cons for the church in de facto allowing one-year missions. You talked about chaos for one.
Quite frankly, I think it sends a positive message that, hey, we're living in the real world here. And it's okay to massage these things a little bit. If somebody has a special talent and they need to get to it, in the case of a physical football player or a basketball player, then think about this beyond just, well, that's the way it came down off the mount.
So should they just get a call that says you called to a 1-year mission?
I think that would create the problems that Peggy talked about, but I think that might be in the church's best interest to do it that way because these guys are all, one is different from the other. They're not joining the army here, although maybe some of them feel like that's what it is. But the church has certain ways of doing things. I get that, but they're still dealing with individual souls, and each person is different, and each person should be treated with that in mind. You have great LDS faithful followers of that religion who didn't go on missions, and Steve Young comes to mind. I mean, maybe Steve, I think I've heard Steve say that he kind of sort of wishes he had, but he's also has done so much good for the church. And you hear this a lot. Well, don't go on a mission, but you can do so much good aside from that. The thing is that the church looks at it as though it's some sort of character building experience beyond just quote unquote sharing the gospel. And so Steve missed out on that, but he sure didn't miss out on influencing a lot of people's lives in a positive way.
Okay, so Gordon, are there female athletes who might, if they did this, would they be viewed differently? Kevin, you just wrote about a cross country, female cross country. What if she wanted to take a year off or go on a 1-year mission? Would they be treated differently than the football players?
That's a great question, Peggy. I haven't talked to a female athlete about that, but you talk about Jane, how do you say her last name?
Hendegren.
Yeah. I mean, this is a world-class athlete,
Yeah.
And I don't know if she would have any desire to do that kind of thing. I wonder, could you even do that? I'm not enough of an expert in track or cross country to really even analyze what would happen to an athlete like that. But she's off the charts. I was surprised she didn't win at all as a freshman this year. She finished second.
Yeah.
But unbelievable talent. I hope that they would be treated the same way according to what's in their heart and what they feel is good for them. I get the organizational side of it, and I can see mission leaders out there going, oh, man, if I have to deal with 200 different situations and I'm not sure what's going to happen here or there, they might. It's hard enough as it is.
Yes.
I talked to a general authority once, church leader, and he said a mission president is one of the hardest callings in the church. And if you had to juggle all of that in addition to what they already have to handle, would be quite a challenge, but not impossible.
Yeah, well, you can see the mission president in an interview saying, let's get the play. Oh, let's see, you're due to go home in this amount of time.
Yeah.
And now let's see the new one. You're due to. I would think that the pressure, at least to serve a mission, is different for women, though. It's still officially optional for women, where it's more expected for men. So I guess that would come into play too, correct?
And
Kevin, what would it do to her if she took a year off?
I'm not an expert in running, but I mean, I could imagine that it's obviously not the same physical challenge as football necessarily, just like basketball is not the same as football. But I mean,
have you ever run cross country?
Yeah,
That sounds pretty challenging to me.
1 year cross country.
You look like a runner.
But I mean, I could imagine that's going to be equally difficult. I mean, from the amount she has to run, and the challenging, and I also think a big part of college running, I mean, I don't know this for a fact, but she mentioned it whenever she talked about BYU, is like a big part of running at the college level is the people you're around, because they have to push you to the level, and also have the coaching staff there to be able to push you to that level, even if she is a phenomenal athlete on her own right before she even got to BYU. But she's missing out on all of that in theory to go on a mission. So I don't know. I mean, I imagine it would be significant though.
There's not the money involved, obviously.
That
either.
too, yeah.
There have been Olympic athletes who have gone on missions and come back and competed in the Olympics.
But even for her though, the level of athlete, even though obviously a quarterback makes a different level of money than pretty much any other position in all of college sports, but I mean, she could make a lot of money being the best runner.
Right.
In college sports right now.
I'll make a prediction. Yeah. She will make a lot of money.
Right. And I'm sure she already, I mean, she's done a lot. I mean, she was the Gatorade Player of the Year already. So.
Okay. When it comes to 1 year mission, we're talking about these elites that have the chance and prospect to make lots of money. And we've talked about other elite, elite engineers, elite pianists, whatever. But this, some might say this smacks of they're getting special treatment that way. They're, quote, allowed to do this. Keeping in mind that everyone's allowed to serve as long as they want on a mission, ultimately. Does it seem kind of elitist or privileged, Gordon?
I think some people might view it that way. One of the biggest problems in the LDS Church, in my opinion, is people judging one another. I don't think there's room for that. People could look at it and call it privileged if they wanted to. I would call it individualized. But I don't expect this to happen a whole lot. I don't think it's going to catch fire and everyone's going to do it. But there might be more than a few who want to do it that way. And if people want to call them privileged, athletes are kind of used to that, but they are also used to being privileged. So we'll see how that turns out. But ultimately, these are spiritual, personal decisions that individuals in the faith have to view it and weigh it as they see fit. And I'm not going to question anybody in that regard. And again, the problem is that this is preached from the pulpit from the time these kids are very young. Remember that song, I Hope They Call Me on a Mission? Sing that, Kevin. Do you know it?
I do not know it.
I hope they call me on a mission when I grow a foot or two. Is that, so it's almost ingrained. It is ingrained in these young people. And so when the time comes, they feel, even if they decided to come home early, there may not be just a direct judgment of them, or they may not feel that, but just because of the way things are set up and the way people are made to feel, they may have to deal with that one way or the other. And it sounds like these guys, the football players that we're talking about here, they don't have that. They're not second guessing themselves. And when I talked to Enoch Watson, he said, I feel great. And he got back in October so he could train for next season, and he felt like he needed that run up in order to do it. And he went to Chile. How do you say that? Chile. Anyway.
The one in South America.
Yeah, that one. And he said he had a wonderful experience and that everybody welcomed him with open arms when he got back.
But I also think because I talked to Brock Harris and his family about this very thing, and they undeniably have heard the critics who say that all of these things that we're talking about. And I also think there's this added element of that, the fact that when he committed to BYU, he could have gone to a lot of other places, but this was undeniably more of an issue when he became the face of BYU, because when you look at Walker Lyons, who did this exact same thing a couple of years ago, like I'm sure he faced blowback as well. I haven't talked to him, but it's not as high profile of a story as the fact that it's Ryder, Lyons, and the the highest rated players going to the church owned school at BYU. And he kind of knew this going in, that he was going to become this face of a program that's attached to his own faith. And all his decisions now are going to be looked through that prism, when he didn't necessarily have to choose that path, which is part of why he said, like, I'm doing this. I'm sacrificing. Like a lot of people say, oh, you're not sacrificing enough. But he's like, look at all the things that he is sacrificing, and look at all the things the decision that he's made, that he's in a position that no one really else has been in this position necessarily, particularly with the amount of money that's now on the table for him. And he said, like, his dad told him, don't do this, not from a lot of reasons. Like there's going to be a lot of blowback, if you had to speak a language, like just from a practical reason, like year 2 is when you're going to know the language and all this thing. But he said, the fact that he's going through all this and he knows the consequences, he knows not the consequences, he knows the critics, he knows what people are going to say, and he's still doing this. He thinks that's a testament to his own faith in and of itself.
Do they speak a different language where he's going?
I Spokane. I don't know. I don't think so. Maybe. I don't know.
Ryder's going to Orlando, but Spanish,
he will be
Spanish speaking, right?
Yeah.
Does he speak Spanish now? Do you? I don't know. Or is he going to have to learn that language?
I don't know.
Yeah.
The thing about Ryder is, man, you could go on YouTube now and see highlights from every one of his high school games. That's the kind of focus. That's the kind of spotlight that's on these kids from a very early age. And so when you're LDS, and then you have a whole nother layer of intensity that comes with folks who are members of that church. And so that's what he's dealing with. And I think they're used to it. I think they've gotten used to it at a young age because so much attention is paid to them. And now they have to weigh it in a different way, not just football, but, where they rank in the kingdom.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens. Okay. And I guess part of the equation too is to see when they come back as to who's still there and if they can really compete for a job, right? It'll
be interesting. You said that Walker, Ryder's brother, when he was going to go for a year, but he stayed for 16 months.
He stayed a little extra.
I wonder if that will happen because once you get in that whole mindset, then sometimes you're moved to do things a little differently. But I think if this is their plan, they were wise to talk about it beforehand.
Kevin and Gordon, since we have you here, the anti-Latter-day Saint chant broke out again at the University of Cincinnati game. That's happened several times now. Kevin, why is this happening? And Gordon, is there any way to end this? Give me your thoughts.
I think the first thought that comes to my mind is BYU is so much more visible on on people's minds and fan bases' minds who have never thought about BYU before. So while I think we might see it as like we're so BYU and Utah centric that we might see like why now, but for a lot of people, I think this is their first major interaction with BYU in a lot of ways because they are now in the Big 12. Now they're on a national stage. Now they're contending for college football playoffs. And so I think a University of Cincinnati student who probably never had any reason before to think about BYU is all of a sudden now interacting with this institution and this football program for the first time. And then the other part of it too that we talked about is I do think for the average student, college age person who this church, I think, is weirdly on their radar, even if they don't know a lot of people, because we've seen on Netflix, we've seen on Hulu, we've seen on all these like streaming platforms. There's these major blockbuster, shows, TV shows depicting the LDS church in probably, I don't know how true.
Not always the best
light. Right. And there's nobody to fact check these things of going to somebody like, if you're just a person in New Jersey or Providence, Rhode Island, or wherever, good places that you would never think have any reason to even think about BYU. Cincinnati, I would probably put in that category a little bit. And now I think you're seeing, I think there is this, like, it is a moment right now where it's on people's minds for the first time in a lot of ways, or renewed, maybe I would say, and there's nobody to fact check it. And I think that's part of it.
It's kind of a mixed bag for the LDS Church because on the one hand, they want publicity. They want their profile to be high, but then they get the blowback. I don't know. Kevin and I talked about it. I don't know what it is. Is it church history? Is it social issues? Is it these? And Kevin and I were thinking, well, wait a minute. These kids, some of whom are enjoying adult beverages at the game, may not have ever even thought about any of that stuff. They just get caught up in it. It started, I think Arizona was the first place, if I'm remembering right.
Rhode Island.
And then people hear about that, and the next guy comes up with it. Let's do this. And it doesn't help when BYU's kicking their trash all over the field. And that happens a lot. And the better BYU gets, people, they begrudge winners sometimes. And we'll see where it goes from here. But these lame excuses, these lame apologies that we're hearing from administrators, that's not enough to get it fixed. I think it's a bigger challenge, really, because members of the the faith itself is not really seen all that favorably in some places. And that's true around our country as well. And so it's incumbent, and I'm not asking the victim here, blaming them, but I am saying that the church will need to do things, I think, to improve that image. And I know that's important to them because I've talked to people. I talked to a guy who was employed by the church to do a 3-year study on what they could do to appeal to people in a more, more acceptable way. And so it's on their mind. They want to bridge this gap and erase this kind of nonsense. And that's what it really is. It is bigoted and it is nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, obviously having a chant at a game that's offensive against the other team is not really news. The problem here is, of course, is you're putting down a group of people on their religion.
Right.
And that's what crosses the line, I think, most people.
Have you ever heard anybody use those words as far as the Catholics go, or the Methodists, or the... Yeah. And some of them have faced great challenges in the past. We're talking about a football game here, but it is a little bigger than that when you include an entire religion.
Well, when you're talking about solutions, like I don't have them, and Gordon, I think you have some ideas, but at the same time, like when I was in Boston for BYU basketball playing UConn, and Boston is obviously not a place where I think you would even think these chants would occur. But I was talking to a BYU fan over there who we've talked to in the past for stories like this. And he was like, because he was in Providence when this happened. And he said, I came here, and he brought his kids with him. And he said, I'm still worried that this is going to happen in Boston, Massachusetts, a year later. And I think just one of the things, like, this is not coming from me. This is just coming from people either within BYU or fans of BYU, who there's also a part of this that wish that BYU or the church or somebody would just take a little bit of a stronger stand and say, like, this is not okay. Because the reason why they say that is because they've actually seen some progress, or they just had some progress a couple months ago when this chant happened at Colorado, where there was finally some momentum where BYU, it's not like they were so much more forceful, but they were more outspoken of saying that this was not okay. And then it led to a fine from the Big 12, a $50,000 fine, and then also increased security in the stands, where now inside the student section, there are plainclothes, I don't want to say police officers, but just security people around. And you could threaten the immediate removal from the game. Your season tickets could be on the line, things like that. And there's probably not as much of a problem right now at Colorado, but that hasn't happened across. Obviously, it did not happen at Cincinnati. But we've seen in some institutions in the Big 12, as this has become more of an issue, or BYU's talked about it more. Texas Tech, before the game, Grant McCaslin, their basketball coach, said, "Hey, I know you guys are want to win, but just the one line is you're going to be thrown out if you have offensive chants." And we've seen that at some Big 12 institutions, others not. But if BYU is more outspoken, this issue is more in the know for institutions that have no real interaction with BYU for the most part. Right. Maybe that will help.
They made that announcement at Cincinnati too, and it happened anyway.
But not before the game.
Yeah. I mean,
it was reactive.
It's just it's something that should be addressed. However, knowing the church the way I do, I could also see them, turning the other cheek. I mean, because the more you create a sort of a negative blowback, sometimes then it backfires on you. So they have to be careful about how they approach it.
Kevin Reynolds, Gordon Monson, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
I want to talk to you about sports later, Peggy. We got to get her a little more into it. It's not too late.
And thanks to Peggy Fletcher-Stack.
Always a pleasure.
And to our producer, Chris Samuels. We remind our listeners that they can keep up on all the happenings in and about the church by subscribing to the Salt Lake Tribune's free Mormon Land newsletter. Just go to soltrib.com to sign up, and we'll talk again next time on Mormon Land.